Hey guys, today I'm working on a 2000 Suburban 4x4. I've had a leaking axle seal on the right side on the front for the last year, and yesterday and today I'm taking the initiative to take that axle seal out and replace it. Now there are two videos on the internet that I've found that are useful. The first is from Brian's Mobile 1, and he published a very good video describing how to do this, but his battery died about halfway through. And a second video just published a few months ago was done by Mr. Sillyman, and I suggest you read both of those before you walk into this. I'm going to describe my experience. Okay, so we're under the car. This is the left front wheel, and the first thing you want to do is to get the vehicle up onto jack stands, chock the wheels, put the emergency brake on, and then you may as well right away remove the fluid from the differential housing. Okay, now at the moment I've got the vehicle back on the ground, but what I've done is I've taken off the axle housing. The first step in terms of doing that is to remove these 6 bolts here, and removing those bolts will be the first step towards getting the axle tube out. Now, one of the commenters on the internet described how you can take the mating flange here and use a block of wood and drive that mating flange out so you can get the axle out without having to take the whole axle tube off. That was an abject failure in my situation because the sway bar gets in the way of the head of the axle tube, and so the tube is too long, the axle is too long to permit me to completely remove it, and so I had to take the whole tube out. Now the next step in terms of doing that is to undo the harness, the wiring that goes to the motor that locks the axle in place. And so you undo that wiring, and then the next step is to take off the 5 bolts that hold the medial aspect of the axle tube in place. Remove the bolts that hold the medial aspect of the axle tube in place, and then undo the nuts, the 2 nuts that hold it in place up here, and then the whole thing slides down. Just be careful not to lose any extra hardware. In particular around this area, there's a whole lot of loose parts, and you have to be very careful not to let them fall when you take the axle tube out. And I'm told that to do that, it's a little bit easier if you leave the vehicle in 4-wheel drive high mode, so that the shift arm holds it all into place. And so that's the way I did it. It seemed to work pretty well. Okay, this is the whole axle tube assembly. This is the lateral aspect, and this is the medial aspect. This is the axle flange. It mates up with the flange of the CV axle. And the axle goes through the tube, past the seal, which is in here, and a small bearing, which are roller bearings in here. And then there's a hollow core that's normally filled with fluid. And then out to this side, which is the shifting assembly. Now this is the shifting motor, and some manuals, the Haynes manual for instance, describe having to remove this, and I chose not to do it. I'm not sure if I need to. We'll see if I can get by without having to do that. This is the nuts and bolts that are in the medial section. I'll take these off in turn. First, a washer. It looks like it's symmetrical. It goes in first. And then the second bit is this shifter assembly, and I can take this all off as a unit, like so. Now you can see that, hopefully you can see it. The shifter assembly has this part which the shift motor presses on, and that in turn pushes these forks that slide this device back and forth. Now you can see it's asymmetrical with the tapered segment going laterally and the flat segment going medially. And inside of that is this set of gears, and this also is asymmetrical with the end like this going laterally, and then this end with the 2 little notches going medially. And so this shifter, this slides in and out with the shifter. Now, if you look at what's left here, we've got the medial aspect of the shaft, and there's a little notch here. Now if you look at this one here, I'm not sure if you can see this, but there's a little wire C-shaped washer in here, and that washer, you can see it's a shorter distance medially and then laterally larger distance, and that washer touches up against the axle shaft, and when you tap on the axle shaft with a piece of wood and a hammer, it slides the that little C washer into this groove right here, and so that locks it in place. And so when we put things back together again, what you need to do is you need to overcome that and bang it through. It's pretty easy to get that back into place. Now also in here there's a little washer with two little flanges on it. Let's see if I can get that out for you. I'm going to take the whole axle out. So there's our axle. And there's this little washer right here. See it, two ears on it that hold it in place, and they mate in with the axle tube like so. Now let's flip it over and have a look at the lateral side. Zoom that in for you. Okay, so the seal is this here. It's quite a big seal, quite a large seal. This is the outside and the inside. And the outside mates up with the axle on the flange going through here. And this seal sits right into this cavity here. And you take a large screwdriver and pry it out. When I first started to take this out, I thought the seal was just this part here. And so I used a screwdriver trying to get it out, but in fact the whole thing is the seal. The whole thing pops out like that. And so there you have it. You can see the roller bearings in there, and we're going to have to do a real good cleanup before we put this all back together again. So at the end of the day, we'll tap in the new seal, slide in the axle shaft, put all of the hardware and the medial aspect together, and then put it all back together again. Oh, I should mention, by the way, that when you mate up these surfaces again, in particular the medial surface of the axle tube, remember this is filled with oil, and so you need to make sure that you achieve a tight seal. I'm going to use some RTD sealant, just a thin coat around the space, and of course we're going to make sure this is perfectly clean. And I'm going to put a little bit of RTD sealant on the bolts as well. Some people advise using Loctite. I believe the torque rating is about 35 foot-pounds, so you'd have to look that up, be sure of that, and put it in together. Hopefully it doesn't leak on you. At the end of that, remember to refill the transfer case with oil, the appropriate oil for your vehicle, and you're good to go. Thanks for watching.